Kiitos, kiitos. Thank you so very much, Northern Lapland and this community of Inari, for inviting me and enabling me to come and see this beautiful part of the world. It really is a pleasure and a privilege. Now, I also want to thank you for extending the period of time that I have to share with you my thinking about regeneration, regenerative thinking, because most times I have to compress what is actually involves the biggest shift in human consciousness on the planet Earth in 300 or 400 years, and I have to sort of cover that territory in more like 20, 25 minutes, constantly watching the clock. So I really will grateful just to have a little bit more time to do that. Today I'm going to talk, as in your program, a little bit more about the theory of regeneration, because it's an idea that's catching on fast. Generally, I've noticed an enormous change in the last 2 years. I've been trying to study it for probably the last 5 to 8 years. But at the same time, it's becoming quite popularized. Everyone likes something that's novel, a new buzzword to add on to their conference agendas and their strategic plans. But because it is so deep and so important and so fundamental, what I'm urging us to do today is to take a little bit more time together to understand what it really means. So I also thought my title was The Future of Regenerative Tourism. I think it's really the future of how we're going to live on planet Earth together and live well. So I thought I'd start by saying, well, okay, the future. What do we know about our future? Well, the obvious thing is it hasn't happened yet. That's the definition of the future. But what we are confident in saying is that future is the sum total of all the visible actions and choices made by people now. So what we're doing now, the choices we're making, are going to shape the future. But those actions and choices are actually shaped, whether we are conscious of them or not, but they're shaped by these invisible beliefs, assumptions, and values that each of us carry around with us. There are long names for that. They could be mindset, but the other big long word for that bundle of invisible beliefs, assumptions, and values is called a paradigm. So when people say it's all about a paradigm shift, you know it's pretty serious, it's pretty big, it's heavy, and it's going to take a while to fully understand. Because when those deep assumptions that we often haven't even acknowledged, those beliefs and values do change, everything else changes. So we can get an understanding of this if we look back, let's say, to the 1950s, post-war, when our current economy really took form after the war. These were the kind of images that were being put forward as a future to work towards. This is what my parents were thinking about. Some of these images are inevitably from the US of A, but we picked them up here in Europe quite quickly after the war. So you can see how those imaginings of their future became our present. You know, we're all living ideally in our own homes, in little roads that go around, nice bendy roads in fairly concentrated developments. Look at the rise of what was the Dairy Queen. That was the first sort of fast food operation in North America in the 1960s, 70s. Now we tend to eat mostly in the South anyway, not necessarily here in the North, but in the South, a lot of people, that's all they eat is fast food. We're often sitting in front of our televisions. That is changing, of course, because now we have a television that we carry around with us all the time. And obviously the car was dominant. Some of the more wild imaginings back then were things like planes that flew overhead, more looking like drones, and all that is happening very quickly, thankfully not is still under relative control. And the picture on the right, I think, is really telling, because look at our educational system. Our children are learning everything, it seems, on a screen. Obviously, our screens now are highly portable. They're not as the size of the ones in this picture. They couldn't imagine the kind of technology that would enable us to have everything at our fingertips. So you can use this to start to think, okay, if we project this forward, what are we imagining going forward? But the point, and this is where it gets quite serious and a little heavy, is that everything in those pictures were based on a set of fundamental assumptions about how the world actually worked. We relied, and continue to rely, very heavily on the source of knowledge being scientific, what science has told us through very systematic, more and more complex research that's taken place. But many of the assumptions behind that science go back several hundred years ago to when the scientific revolution took place, to people like Bacon and Descartes, and who said, "I think, therefore I am." It's all up here in the mind. And this is important because, unfortunately, well, fortunately, actually, science has continued. But what's happened post-war in virtually every dimension of science, and particularly in physical sciences and biological sciences, all the assumptions about how the world works are being turned upside down. Unfortunately, a lot of that new science is not getting into our way of thinking yet. It hasn't become as popularized as you would expect. It takes a long time for that to happen. But the dominant assumptions that shape the world that we live in now are things like the only reality is what you can touch and measure, what is solid, it's physical. Everything, therefore, is separate. This is really important because we assume I'm an individual. I am separate from you. I am separate from the natural world. There are hard boundaries. So therefore, we end up with these dualities, male, female, inner, outer. It was also based on a way of understanding the world, which was science, and that was to observe something objectively. Remember all this at school. You had to start by defining your problem. What are we doing when we define a problem? We are drawing a boundary around it. We're reducing it to a part of something. So if we want to understand the forest, we reduce it to all of the plants and animals that live in it. There's this still belief that you can actually observe someone, something, some plant, some animal, totally objectively. When we now know from science there is no such thing as objectivity. It is not a thing, it's all energy. And the mere act at looking at an object, whether it's an animal or a particle of physics, you are changing that object. So everything is interactive. That is a fundamental, I cannot express strongly enough just how big that is. Now, that old way of thinking, again, it's separate, we can understand the parts, led to a belief that there's a scarcity, and our economics in the 1800s started to put lines around everything, hedges around our fields and so on, and create a sense of scarcity, and this belief then that you had to compete with each other to get what you needed, as opposed to collaborate and cooperate. That's one of the reasons I'm excited for you here in the north. This is the one part of Europe where we have an indigenous population that has lived in harmony with the natural world for hundreds, if not thousands of years, and have a different way of seeing that world. But that sense of scarcity led to the survival of the fittest, competition, the need to differentiate, and we're doing it every day. Destinations compete with each other, consultants compete with each other, academics compete with each other. It's a highly competitive world. We also have come to the assumption that we are the top dog in this world, that we are superior to other animals, to other plants. We're the ones with brains. Our brains have developed our consciousness. Plants, they don't have brains. How can they be as intelligent as we are? But again, all of the new science is daily now revealing just how intelligent all aspects of life on planet Earth are. Intelligence is built right in. And the last assumption I'm mentioning here, and I don't know if you expected a science lesson, but I hope you understand later why I'm going to this depth. But the other assumption was, therefore, as an individual, I had to be treated as an individual, compete with another. But what we've also done is we've started to concentrate this notion of agency and power. So we're now almost conditioned to assume we need an expert to come and tell you what to do, fly them in, they'll tell you what to do, or we need experts in our institutions. We need to go off and do research and commission something before we take a step forward. So today we're going to talk about tourism. Of course, it's a tourism event. That's what we do. But when it comes to looking at regeneration, I'm asking you to look outside of tourism. Because in the old way of thinking, we would immediately define and reduce the topic of investigation, so tourism. But we can never separate tourism from the context that we're living in. We're also probably all understand, you only have to read your news every morning, that the world is changing very quickly. The things we took for granted, we cannot take for granted anymore. We have a sense that there's issues that we need to address, but do we understand why those issues have become so important? How can we do tourism better? That's the next thing. Most people want immediately to rush to action. Oh, leave the theory behind. Just tell me what to do. Most importantly, make it practical. Give me a list and make sure I can measure it, because if I can't measure it, I can't manage it. These are some of the statements that we say to ourselves. We're now talking about how can we make tourism better, but again, better for whom? Is it better for the entrepreneur? Is it better for the customer? Is it better for the banking, financial community, et cetera, et cetera? These are some of the questions we need to ask. So first of all, we also need to say, well, how do we understand where tourism fits? Tourism is one of those boxes in the total system of life and economics. And I like to show this diagram because this is how the UN, what used to be the UNWTO, sees tourism as, again, a kind of like an economic engine, a box made up of boxes, with some sense of order here. It looks as if, it's a natural thing that you've got this linear movement of people and resources from transportation to accommodation. That's the blue triangles going in that direction. Then we've got it divided up according to different resources. You can look at this slide. I'll let you have all the slides, by the way, if you use them for your own study. But you can see, what does that say, how we see tourism as something that we can divide up, and then we can control. So what happened after the war was tourism started out really as what I call the root of this sector is hospitality. It's the beautiful act of welcoming a stranger into your home, into your home place, and looking after them while they're visiting and sharing food, sharing ideas, sharing thoughts and feelings with a stranger, making them feel comfortable and ensuring they can go on their journey in a healthy and safe way. That's the core of our business. But it was very difficult to make that sound appealing to hard-nosed economists that were looking for things they could measure, looking for economic output. How important was tourism? What were people spending? Where was the money going? So very quickly after the war, I would say it really took off in the 70s, actually. We started to see ourselves differently. We started to recognize that to be in an economic satellite account that showed how important we were, we would have to change the language. So whereas hospitality is about people having experiences, it's kind of soft, it's multidimensional, we turned that into a commodity, essentially, a trip, a commodity, an overnight stay. We could measure that. Our guests, the travelers, have become consumers because we now know that we have to fit into a productive production consumption system. Hosts, and this word hosts we'll come back to because I think it's so important, became suppliers. Travel agents were retailers now, and they were literally copying the structure of the manufacturing sector. Tour operators were seen as wholesalers, and places became destinations, which are a very different way of looking at your home. Is Inari a destination, or is it your home? Is it a place that somebody wants to come and be invited into your home? So I hope you follow me on this and understand where I'm going with this. Does this feel right to you? Do you understand it? Can I have some nods or, yes, some lights? Oh, you're still awake, thank you. I know it is theory, and I did say it would be a little theory at first, so please bear with me. But I'm fortunate to have been with tourism since I was born post-war, obviously. I've worked in tourism in Canada from 1973 right the way through to the 90s, and then back in Europe in 1993. But I was there when I saw this change taking place. So tourism now, in the present time, is viewed for this amazing accomplishment, when you think about it, as a very powerful economic engine. But it's really kind of divided. The economists, the UNWTO, hang out with the big companies, mostly the big brands, the hotel brands, which again have grown from 1 or 2 facilities to tens of thousands of them under one brand around the world. They may all have slightly different names, but it's one owner and one company owning it. The airlines have just proliferated in number. We had no low-cost airlines when I started out. Now every country has at least 1 or 2, 3 low-cost airlines. So the need for airlines and all the services around airlines and airports, that's what connected us. The tour operators have grown in size, until they got so big, they kind of fell over. Companies like TUI collapsed, etc. Now it's the online tourism operators that are taking a very large chunk of the economic output of this sector. So these are the ones that make up, if you like, the industry. They are large, they're global, they love standardization, have huge extraction of water, resources, emissions. Their focus is always on efficiency, quantity, yield. They inevitably are very price competitive. The ownership is usually absent. It's shareholders, public companies. Decision-making is very top-down, and frankly, they're proving right now to be quite vulnerable. That is only one aspect of tourism, but it's the aspect of tourism that is influencing the political decision makers, okay? Because these guys have concentrated wealth, concentrated power, and a lot of access to decision makers. However, the vast majority of tourism is not that at all. The vast majority of tourism is people like yourselves, small, medium-sized enterprises, often family-owned. If you have a coffee shop, there's a coffee shop here, a lovely coffee shop here, and another one in the museum. You don't want to become a Starbucks. You just want to have a good living. You want to be able to raise your children. You want to spend time with them. You want to be respected in your community. You don't need to go and conquer the world. So you're localized. You are of this place. So therefore, you are much more generative in your community. You get involved in community activities. You focus more on quality and the experience because you have time to do that. You can be more value versus volume oriented. And you make your own decisions for yourself. You're self-organizing. You know you have to be adaptable in order to be resilient. The irony is that this type of business is 95 to 98% of tourism in Europe. In other parts of the world, it's slightly less. The bigger players have got more of a dominance. And yet, the income that you account for is something like 40 to 50%. So the political interest in this sector is not as great. But it's this sector that's either going to make it or break it, as it were, in going forward. So we fragmented this vast thing we call tourism. It's a phenomenon more than anything else. It's an economic sector within an economy. We further fragmented it, and when I was doing research for this, I came across on the internet this statement of actually there were 35 different types of tourism. We love, again, to reduce, define. So there were 35 different types of tourism. Then I went and spoke last week in Poland, where was it? I can't quite remember. It was Barcelona, sorry. And someone said, no, there's one missing off here. That's biotourism. Another one said, well, I've just come from downtown Barcelona, and you're missing something that's really growing down there. It's called urban art tourism. And I also noticed on this list there's no regenerative tourism. So what we automatically do in tourism is we add an adjective to the word tourism, and that creates another box that we have to start to, well, it's just another box. And when things get put in boxes, they tend to stay in boxes. So as a result of this way of thinking, we were ready to be mechanized and digitized. So I would argue that in many places, those big players are seeing a destination more as a conveyor belt, as a place that is someone's unique and very precious home. It's a conveyor belt, and instead of moving the bits of the trip around the conveyor belt, we move our guests around the conveyor belt, and they pick off what they need. So to me, and I don't know whether you're going to agree with me, or hopefully we're going to have a discussion over the next couple of days, this is the kind of mindset that is shaping or has shaped the tourism industry up until now. And we are primed for growth, so much so that those big players need growth. The economy needs growth. We need economic growth. We need more volume, more money. But yet we're also beginning to find out that with that growth comes cost. And we're not necessarily counting the net benefit of what we're doing. But my sense of it at the moment is tourism is being almost driven by the needs of a small number of players, particularly the airlines and the online tour operators, for example. So the airlines are now forecasting the capacity growth of 7%. They're forecasting a demand growth of 8%. They have to have more demand, ideally, than their capacity, because their net income per passenger is so small. So we're getting more and more people flying for less and less value back to the operators. And that's where I think the pressure for growth is happening. But here's the point. Supposing we, as humanity, we as tourism, are not a machine made up of separate parts, because that's the assumption that underpins all of this growth. Supposing we each and together are intelligent, living systems, not inanimate machines, living systems, utterly entangled, utterly interdependent on every other living system. Supposing that becomes, if you like, the first operating principle, because that is exactly what modern science is saying is the case. Supposing the living system of which we are a part, that's called life on planet Earth, is in distress. And we, as one subsector of that, some aspect system of that system, we are the cause of that distress. Supposing it's not about tourism anymore, but it's about our survival as a species, would we start to do things differently if we made that shift in understanding. So then we would go from what can tourism get out of our system to what can it contribute, what can it put in, and we'll repeat that idea later. Supposing, and these are just questions I'm throwing out for us to think about, our role is not simply to grow, as in get bigger, but to contribute to co-creating, that means together, creating a better, healthier, safer, more flourishing world. So supposing, because that's what we're going to look at now. So where are we today, and how did we get here? All of the evidence is suggesting we're at some critical stage in our development as human beings, because we are literally on a cliff edge. We can go to the left, and we're seeing a lot of images like that in real life on our television every day, or we can go to the right, and we're seeing also images of places and communities that are living in harmony with the natural world. How are we going to choose? That, to me, is the big issue. So our world at the moment is experiencing not one crisis, but many. This is a report from the Post-Carbon Institute in 1923. And as you well know, since I would say about 2006, we've focused almost exclusively on climate as the big, big problem. Even today, it's still the dominant one, and that has been reduced, that problem has been reduced to one main focus, and that's carbon emissions. We're now beginning to understand that life is far more interesting and complex than that our climate is not just controlled by the amount of emissions we put into the air, but, for example, the amount of greenery we have on the ground, our water system, our vegetation system, our farming system. All of these other systems are completely interconnected. But, and again, this proves, I hope, my point about how we were trained to think. At that time, it made sense to understand all of these crises by putting them in separate boxes. So here we have, I think, 11. So yes, biodiversity now is recognized as a problem. Waste, soil loss, weaponry, wealth inequality, etc. All separate items, all treated in this report separately. But they're not separate, are they? They are all connected. They all interact with one another. So now we have a new word for that. And the World Trade Organization, this is the head of that, pointed out that no, we are living in what's called a polycrisis, a cluster of related crises. The problem now we're beginning to understand is that they all affect the other, that lead to compounding effects. The overall impact of all this now is exceeding the sum of any of the parts. The polycrisis actually is a living system in its own right. So we're now recognizing that ecological stress, I hope you've heard of Kate Raworth and the donut economics and the social, Resilience Institute, Stockholm Resilience Institute. They identified 9 planetary boundaries that are ecological that we can't crash through without creating a lot more problems. So we've got from 6 to 7 this last year where we're going through. Those are the red wedges going outwards like that. And Kate Raworth said, yes, that's really important, but are we taking care of the health and well-being? Are we supplying what we need to be healthy? Those are the inside of the donut. So it's this donut economics. The point is, it's going in the wrong direction. And then, and by the way, I always get the bad news out in the first, how many minutes have I got now? Half of this presentation. There are other, and then we'll go on to how we're going to sort of deal with all of this. But my point is, unless we have that awareness, unless we understand what we're dealing with, we're not going to be able to make the right decisions to make it literally better and get out of the fix we're in. So the biggest thing I see happening at the moment is because of this notion that we're all separate and individual, and we're seeing politically the polarization that's happening, we're numbing ourselves in a way. We're saying, this, I can't handle this. This isn't my problem. And this is a beautiful, not a beautiful, but a fun cartoon to describe a very unfunny situation of people bailing out the boat at one end, dealing with the problems, mostly right now in the global south, and people in the north still dry, sitting at the top of the boat that's tipped over, saying, I'm not sure if you can read this, I'm sure glad that hole isn't at our end of the boat. So it's, to me, this is one of the challenges we have at the moment. Many of us have separated ourselves from the reality. So we have this increasing sense of competition and scarcity. Many people are feeling they just can't control anything anymore. They're either going to just retreat into the bedroom and watch television, or they've just withdrawn, or they're now into slogan and polarization and shouting at other people. That's unfortunate. We have a real breakdown in community. I would say I'm not sure that that's the case up here, but it certainly is the case down in the big cities. I was in Barcelona, London. There's a real breakdown of community, low levels of trust, poor sense of belonging, and most importantly, a complete disconnection with the real world, with nature. And again, the advantage you have in this part of the world is you cannot forget nature. You are utterly connected to it. I just went around and looked at all the beautiful stalls that you have outside and just see how connected you are. You have the only indigenous communities, not one, but I've learned now 3 different indigenous communities within the Sami community in this part of the world, which is the closest we urban Europeans from the south are going to get to that indigenous understanding. It's here, you live it, and that's your great, great asset, it seems to me. So these risks are converging to a meta-crisis. I'm going through this really fast now, but the most important thing is that Albert Einstein said, if we have to understand, we've created this as a result of that thinking. That's why I did that part in the beginning. If we're going to change it, we have to change the thinking. That's why I really appreciate you letting me talk about this theory, because without an understanding of this, we ain't going to get it right, okay? We'll not be able to get ourselves out of a fix. We need, if we're in a meta-crisis, which is, all of these crises entangled with one another, we need a metamorphosis, and that metamorphosis we can talk about another day, but it involves this different way of seeing who we are, how we act, what our values are, and what we do. And when we change that bundle of, which I told you was a paradigm, everything else changes. It's our seeing that changes our perception, our values, and our values then change our actions. So we have to go back to what is it we see, what do we understand, before we rush out and try and do something. Now, I'm just giving you a roadmap today. That's all I can do. And in order to provide some context for what I hope will be, learning over time. But step 1 now is to look at what are those assumptions. The biggest assumption is that we're living on a dead machine, a dead planet. It's just a hunk of rock. It's got resources on it, life's on it, but we can take what we want from those resources and change that. And that's what our current science is now telling us. It's a real fascinating topic. But those dominant assumptions, when they're applied to tourism, have led to this picture, really, and that's the issue of over-tourism. And that could happen here. You're not immune from it. That's why understanding what is going on is going to be so important. I'm going to skip over the words on this, suffice, because you know what mass tourism looks like. But there is no place on Earth that is immune. And when the places that are really overcrowded say, oh, well, we'll solve it by redistributing it to less crowded places, they might as well be like a doctor saying to you if you have a rash, oh, we'll just scrape a bit off here and spread it around your body. Why would you do that? Why would you distribute the problem? What we need to do is come up with a better solution. That better solution comes on seeing and perceiving ourselves differently, fundamentally differently. Seeing ourselves as being living people, living systems on a living planet. It means learning, as and there's a lot of work involved in doing that, right? I'm just trying to give you, as I said, a roadmap. That's really all I can do in the time we have. How are we doing? Because Gregory Bateson, I should say, his daughter is Norma, doing amazing work now, but he's an ecologist of the 1940s. He said it so well, and the Sami lived this, and many of you live this. We have to now learn how nature works and begin to think and act the way she does. So that means learning and thinking like a tree, for example. I have a colleague in the UK who's developed a course on learn how to think like a tree. And it's about how thinking like a tree can fundamentally affect you as a human being, as an individual. How can we think like trees as communities, and so on. Again, this is all I can do is identify the different ways we need to think. This stuff takes a while to learn, so you're not going to get all this in 101, but I want to, even in the time you've very kindly given me, what I wanted you to come away with is an understanding of where we are and where we have to go. Because if I found an image on the internet that really describes where I think we are at the moment, I'm just going to grab a little water here. Let that image sink in. I think on the left here we have some really, adventurous people like you and I, working very hard, trying to do better, do better, do better. We're climbing up, if you like, that economic graph. We're getting close to the top. We're really feeling good. But maybe we're actually climbing up a mountain slope that looks like this. We want to go to the other side. We want to go to a just and regenerative and resilient society. But if we keep on that particular path, we're going to come to the equivalent of a dead end. We're going to have to go back and go down into the chasm, into the valley, cross the valley to get to the other side. And to complement that image is this diagram, which is used a lot right now, that shows where we've come from and where we are. So post-war, we became a very extractive economy. On the left-hand side, the horizontal line across this diagram, we've been extracting value, taking out resources and energy from the ground and doing things, making things, selling them, wasting them, and throwing them away. Then we realized, thanks to people like Rachel Carson in the 60s, that what we were doing was creating a lot of damage. We were causing an impact on, for example, the birds. They were falling out of the sky because our toxic chemicals we were putting on the plants were killing the birds. And she woke us up, and that was the beginning of this notion of we have to correct action. We have to do less harm. We have to do that to sustain life on this planet. The problem over the last 20, 30 years is the word sustainability has become so vague, people have begun to assume it means we have to do less harm so we can keep on doing it. We can keep being sustainable, so we can sustain business as usual by doing less harm. We even now have quantitative ideas that we can come to a position of being net zero. So I would argue that's where most of industry, economics activity is where we are now. I would say in the last 5 years, you've got this idea of, we've got to give back. We've got to start doing more good. And that, I think, is really where we can begin to restore things, we can repair, we can improve, we can focus on quality, we can start to add social things to this ecological stuff, et cetera, et cetera. We can distribute the benefits. This is all really, really important. It's progress. We can become, quote, net positive. That's the term that Paul Polman from Unilever, when he was there, came up with. That, to me, is what's actually being called regeneration today. Doing more good in your community, for nature, fixing things up. That isn't actually regeneration at all. The vertical red line there is what I call a wall. And we are literally going into the wall, or as the picture suggested, it's a bit of a chasm. In other words, we have to stop there and rethink virtually everything if we want to climb up that mountain towards a just and regenerative society. I've taken a while just to get us to this point because I am concerned at the moment the word regeneration is being just bandied around by anyone that wants to create a new consulting product or a new course or sell a new book and give us some false sense of hope that if we start being nice and do good things, then we're going to be regenerative. We have to change everything, inside and outside. Because now, if we follow what Mr. Bateson said, we have to learn to think the way nature does, because we are nature. And again, this is a fundamental assumption made in the indigenous communities of the world, that we are not external to nature. We are our nature, and we can remember to behave exactly the way nature behaves. Because this is the most important thing about regeneration. Regeneration is simply what life does. It's a process. It's a verb. It's not a noun. You know, there's no such thing as regenerative tourism. Actually, it is a way of seeing, being, and doing that applies to living systems. Because what does life do? Life always, whether it's the smallest, lichen on a rock, an organ in your body, a planet in the ecosystem of planets, life creates the conditions for life to thrive. And if you come away with any phrase from this presentation, please take that home with you and think, are my actions as a living being creating the conditions for all around me, the system of which I am a part? Am I creating the conditions for that life to thrive? If that's all you remember and all you live, you don't need to do anything else. You'll be on the right course. But it's a bit harder than that, but nevertheless, that is the essence. Because what regeneration does is it brings life back to things that were dying or degenerating. Our current systems are dying, they are degenerating. But by learning how life regenerates itself all the time, we can regenerate ourselves. We can basically make it whole again and heal that fragmentation of all those boxes that separate us. And that process is also a process of remembering. That's I love some aspects of the English language, because remembering is to put the pieces, the broken pieces, the separate pieces back together again. I'm getting older and I'm finding I'm not remembering as much as I would like to. I haven't got to dementia yet, although maybe after this presentation you might disagree. The point I'm saying is I'm always now trying to put the pieces of my memory back. But that's what we're being asked to do as a society, as humanity on planet Earth right now. And most importantly, if we need a change in system, this is what it's all about. This is what regeneration does. So in summary at the end, well, it's not the end because I've got about 20 more slides, but if sustainability is doing less harm, then regeneration is not just about doing more good, it's about developing or remembering the innate capability in each one of us to take back responsibility, to organize ourselves, and create the conditions for life to thrive and evolve. So to do that in step 4, and if you remember my picture of people climbing up a mountain slope which was going nowhere, this is from Otto Scharmer, a guy that's done a huge amount of work on how to make these changes. We have got to the top of that mountain. We're going to have to come back down and unlearn those assumptions that we often are unaware of and replace them with new assumptions. And in the process of that, we're going to use parts of our being that we've neglected, because a lot of these problems are due to the fact that it's all up here. We have neglected our capacity as human to sense what's going on around us and respond to those senses, to feel what's going on around us and respond to those emotions, and also that sense that we have, that I call intuition, or our spiritual selves, that we need in also to bring to bear. So we need to replace our outdated assumptions, the red ones, with new ones. That takes a bit of learning, and as I said before, we need to do that with all of ourselves, with our bodies, our hearts, our souls, and our brains. So the fundamental question that really underpins regenerative hospitality, because I think that's the core here, is how can hospitality be in service of life? There are 3 diagrams. I love these diagrams. They really express the change. A picture says 1,000 words. Our current system, our old system, the dominant system today is still ego-driven, that I'm a separate individual, I'm top dog, I control, I can manage, I can come up with 10-point plans, I can sort things out due to my own intellect. But it's a controlling, extractive way of being on the planet. Now we're beginning to realize, no, we're part of this web of life, the whole community of life. And our job perhaps is to protect it. If we've, create a conservation area, create a national park, and manage it. Again, it's getting better. We're starting to take back more responsibility for our actions, but it's not where we really need to be headed. The word savor comes from Indian word, and it's really being of service to life. So there we see us now assuming our role in this ecosystem as a keystone species. We're not here just to take. We are here to look after and make sure the conditions are right for nature to thrive. So it's a fundamental difference. And one of the things I'll ask you to take away thinking about is, how in my business can I be in service of life? How can I create those conditions in Inari, in your area, in your town, in your region, that for the rest of life all around you to thrive? That is the paradigm shift. That is the fundamental shift in understanding of how the world works that is going to get us either across that chasm or through that wall to regenerative hospitality. That is what thinking differently is going to enable us to be adaptable right now to the incredible change we're dealing with, and to start together to build resilient, caring communities that can thrive together and can learn to co-evolve together. That's what regenerative hospitality is really all about. And I've got, where am I? So regeneration, as I said, I'm repeating myself, but again, I have to, the power of repetition. What we're being asked to do is to come home, come back to our places. That's why regions like Inari, northern Lapland, and the communities within it are where the action has to take place, is to come back into community to create those conditions for life to thrive. In the same way, plants cannot grow without soil. They obviously need, leaves to capture the sunlight. They need roots to go in and capture the minerals, and a system of transporting those back and forth through the plant. But ultimately, the source of nourishment that enables them to grow is soil. Anyone who's a gardener knows if you want a successful garden, you have healthy soil first and foremost. But I would argue, as human beings, the soil for us is the soil of community. And what that means is that having around you people and relationships with people, so you've learned to come together and celebrate your individual differences, your individual essences, your individual contributions, but learn to pull those together in a community action to make change. So in the future, regenerative activity will not just be about tourism, it'll be about the flourishing of a place. Tourism and hospitality can play a wonderful role in making that happen, but it can't drive it. That's an important thing to remember. Hospitality, as I say, can convene, it can invite people to come around a table and have meaningful conversations, for example. It can bring in people with new ideas like you're doing now. This is a fundamentally important contribution that hospitality makes, but it's the community as a whole that needs to come together to change the way we are in the future. And I'm really playing around right now in my thinking with this notion that when you want to make it really simple, it's about how do we evolve into communities that can truly care for the place and the people in that community, and the place and the people in other communities that we deal with. But we develop the self-organizing capacity within the community. You don't wait for the municipality to hire a consultant from Helsinki or, Minnesota, it doesn't matter where, to come in and do a 10-point plan, because nature doesn't do 10-point plans. Forests don't have 10-point plans. Forests are created by all the species in that evolving together and growing together. So how can we copy that in our business? And the most important thing is it's about being fully alive, fully who we really are. It's about developing that viability, so making sure that it's viable, we have the resources we need, even the word resource has got to be thrown out, but we have what we need in order to be healthy together, and the vitality and energy and will to do things. Regeneratively means that will enable us to be more resilient and naturally restorative, and we will evolve together because the conditions we're in are always going to change. So the last 2-3 slides basically are just hammering home the things we can learn from nature. Nature doesn't just survive. Nature orchestrates. As I said, every single part plays its part in keeping the whole healthy and alive. That's what we can learn from nature. And the goal is the ability to be fully alive, to self-organize, but in that process contribute to the health and well-being of the whole. And none of us can go it alone. Nobody's got all of the answers. We're a web. And the primary rule is to contribute to the health and aliveness of the system of which we are a part. So I'm saying to many people, well, I'm not saying, but I mean, we are encouraged to now see nature as our teacher. And again, you're in this amazingly advantageous position that you're living with nature every day. Every one of you every day has got a sense of what's happening out there with the weather, the climate at the moment. You are far more aware of the changes that are going on than is the case if you were living in a suburb of Helsinki, for example, and certainly in a place like London. So you don't even need to change your vocabulary from the environment. You're not an environment. Nature is us. It's our kin. We are nature here. So drop that word environment, but I don't think you need to learn that one. Again, you're familiar with nature's principles and patterns. Start to bring all of you to this task. And again, I sense myself that you're already doing some of this. When it comes to the business, really start thinking about the act of hosting and hospitality. Tourism is the old industrial model of extraction, in my opinion. We need to rethink and reshape tourism based on the idea of contribution, not extraction. So think about health and not wealth as in money, but wealth as in well-being as an objective for your communities. So the goal, as I mentioned, is vitality and viability. So we can bring places back to life. I think you're full of life here, so you already know that. But I thought I'd end with a quote from a writer called Ernesto Pebero, who's writing on the internet. But he said, vitality is not something we build, it's something we tune into. It's the natural part of being human. It's a field, it's an energy field where we rejoin when our relationships realign with the patterns of life. Now, what I like is this. You can hear vitality in the laughter of a community garden. You know when your place is fully alive and healthy. You feel it, you sense it. in the clarity of a mountain stream, listening to the river last night next door to my room just down the road here, in the hum of a syntropic forest at dusk. Because where there is vitality, there is relationship, and where there is relationship, there is care. And where there is care, there is hope. And that's why I have hope being here with you. Thank you for your careful listening to a long presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna Pollock, for fascinating and thought-provoking presentation. I'm sure you gave us a lot of food for thought, everyone in the room. We had a few questions from the audience, if you don't mind answering them quickly. Pardon?
Can you translate them?
Yes, I can. Actually, they're in English, so it made my job easier. First one going, good point, this places, destination thinking. Sounds like a target or must do.
Sorry, could you say slowly?
I'm not entirely sure. It says, good point, this places, destinations, sounds like a target or must do. I'm sure the person touched upon your earlier, the beginning of your presentation where you talk about these destinations working as a conveyor belts, and
yes,
then you,
yes.
yeah, exactly, and then you have smaller family, society-run smaller companies.
Well, I'm saying is that we've turned places, in many cases, into conveyor belts because of the industrial way we've done tourism. And, you know, so we've commodified, you know, it's a trip. We measure trips. We don't look at the quality of that experience or the diversity of ways in which the benefits from that trip can filter through into the community. So I'm obviously suggesting that we let go of that conveyor belt model in some way.
Yeah, we always talk about, like you said in the beginning, we talk about growth. That's one of the words we humans like to use in every context we interact with one another. The next question is about growth, and it's a big question, but just to briefly about this conveyor belt versus that kind of nature-driven model, I would imagine that it's in our nature as well, that it could happen quite easily, that once we see this kind of possibility in the horizon, that we can create growth, and suddenly we are in the system that is a conveyor belt-like.
Well, yes, let's look at growth. Right now, in our economic system, growth is measured in quantifiable terms. So it's number of trips, average daily spend, and it comes down to money. What we don't measure is where that money seeps, where it goes to, all right? So we don't measure, look at the benefit from that income. We know that the very economic system inevitably results in more and more of that money being concentrated in fewer hands. When we're seeing that now in the broader economic picture every day. And so what we have is a small number of people who are shrinking in number, but their wealth is vastly expanding. So that's beginning to show that this economic system, if it is allowed to run its course, has that result. So in tourism, I'm saying, again, are we aware when we have people coming into our community who is benefiting from that directly, immediately, which is perfectly justifiable. Every business should generate income and profit. But how is that also potentially improving other qualitative things, the quality of life, in the people who are also hosts in that community? I mean, you're seeing this in places like Barcelona, for example. The quality of life for the residents of Barcelona has gone down in direct proportion to the number of visitors. And in many parts of the town, the visitors have taken over neighborhoods that used to be enjoyed by people who lived and worked there. So more growth in terms of volume can have disastrous results. I'm saying we all grow as human beings, but it isn't always quantitatively. I mean, I grew up to here and then I stopped. I wished I could have gone a bit bigger, but you know, I stopped. A tree grows to a certain height and it stops. I use the example of an oak tree. A mature oak doesn't go beyond, there's a limited variation in the size of the oaks in England, for example, But what happens is it becomes it is a habitat for other creatures. So a mature oak is host to something like 3,000-4,000 different species of life. So if we defined growth as how can we grow tourism so that it supports all these other enterprises, which also will make us more resilient because we have diversity, etc. So that's how I see growth. I'm not anti-growth. I'm just asking you to rethink what it might look like.
Thank you so much, Anna. You actually answered so wonderfully this question that we had from the audience. Why do we need growth? So that was a really elaborate and beautiful
2 for the
answer.
price of 1.
Exactly. Thank you so much. Let's give a round of applause to Anna Pollock. Thank you so
very much
much.
for your patience.